Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Excellent. All right. I'd like to first off wish everyone a good morning. It's a Friday morning. I know it's not always everyone's favorite day to do an orientation, but maybe as a positive side, I know we'd scheduled 2 hours, but I think most of the new folks that are on this call, new grantees, they're familiar with violence prevention in general. And so I think it probably, we definitely won't take the full amount of time, maybe about half the time, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions if necessary. Okay, so just want to start out by saying, obviously we're recording this. Once the recording is available sometime within 24 hours, hopefully before the end of the day, I'll be able to send out a recording of the training along with a copy of the PowerPoint. As Luana had asked at the beginning, please mute your microphone throughout the training. If you have questions, please use the chat box. My hope is that because I can't see the chat box, that someone on my team will see the chat box and be able to point out any questions that there are. Okay, so just briefly on today's agenda, we'll do some welcome and introductions of the grantees as well as the other team. We'll hear from our FISCU director, the grants director who's on the call. She'll say a few words, and then we'll get into the meat of what we're going to talk about, which is a brief introduction to violence prevention at ICJIA. We'll go through what our grant agreement process is like. We'll talk about compliance issues, get into payment methods, and then at the wrap up, we'll talk about kind of what next steps are as it relates to our budget committee meeting and when approval will finally happen. Okay, so if I could ask the team members to introduce themselves individually.
I guess I'll start since my name is at the top. My name is Alan Blackman, and I'm a grant specialist with the Federal State and Grants Unit. I've been with ICJIA now going on 4 years, will be in July. I've worked primarily with the violence prevention program as well as with the community-based violence intervention programs.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Kemba. I am new to ICJIA. I actually just started May 1st. I'm excited to be a part of the team and excited to meet some of my grantees.
All right, and Ethan is not, Ethan is on vacation today. So Jaslyn.
My name is Jaslyn. I am a grant specialist. I've been with ICJIA for 2 years already, and I am in the violence prevention team.
My name is Sierra. I've been a grant specialist with ICJIA for 2 years, and I primarily work with the violence prevention grantees.
Hi, everybody. My name is Luana Murphy. I'm a criminal justice specialist too. I've been with ICJIA since 2003, I think. I've worked on a variety of state and federal programs, and happy to see what's in store for the new year.
Thanks, Luana. And I'm Shay Hoffman. Welcome, everyone. I've been with ICJIA since 2013. Before that, I was with the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority for a couple of years. I started there in 2011 and moved over to ICJIA when that agency went away and the Criminal Justice Information Authority swallowed up all of the programs that IVPA was responsible for. And then Risa, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Risa May. I am currently the director, the program director for our team. I've been here for almost 16 years now, working in different departments. Last department was our R3 department. I want to welcome you to ICJIA and our grant, the grant unit. Enjoy this process. If you have any questions, any concerns, make sure that you reach out to your grant specialist. They are here to help you in any aspect that you need. So welcome.
Great, thanks, Risa. All right, so if we could have the people on the call from our grantees introduce themselves.
I'll go first. I'm driving. So I'm Angel Humphrey, the Executive Director of Touch by an Angel Communities Enrichment Center located in the Austin community.
Great, and I'm sorry, I should have asked, do you mind just giving a sentence or two about what your agency does?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. So our agency, we work with youth from ages 14 through 21 for those youth in underserved communities over in Austin and parts of Garfield to obviously help keep them off of the streets and get them engaged into more positive activities. We have a nutrition program that we run on the weekends, Friday through Sunday, for those students who lack food insecurity issues.
Great, thanks, Angel. Next. So I can't see the list of folks that are here on my screen, but I think we had someone from Adler.
Yeah, I'm here. My name's Elena Quintana. In fact, there's two of us here from Adler, so we can better absorb the information. My name's Elena Quintana, and I'm the Executive Director of the Institute on Public Safety and Social Justice. We convene the community restorative justice hubs, but we also do a number of in-prison programs that address trauma and higher education program offerings.
Great, thank you, welcome.
And also Matt Barrington is on the call, also from Adler. So just to kill two, well, I guess I'll say to feed two birds with one seed, right?
Excellent, nice pivot there.
Yes, my nonviolence pivot.
Okay, next, do we have someone from Precious Blood Ministries? What about Illinois Prison Project?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Sobel from the Illinois Prison Project. It's really nice to see you all. We represent incarcerated people who are serving sentences that are unjust or in error or just wrong. And I think we're here today is focusing specifically on medical release. So it's really nice to be here and we're excited about this.
Great, nice to meet you. Okay, do we have any other grantees that are on who I didn't see?
This is Norman Cole with Global Giving Foundation. We're in a community for gang prevention. We come to actually, empower the community and empower the kids, and actually from 6 to high school. Just trying to bring an outreach to the community and bring forth, their challenges and everyday activities, and trying to give them a better way and better light and way of thinking, and trying to not be in those situations.
Great, welcome, Norman. Anyone else?
Someone from Precious Blood will be joining in a minute.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we will go ahead and move on. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, so just want to briefly talk about violence prevention at ICJIA. So everything kind of starts with our statewide violence prevention plan. We're in the last year of our 5-year plan. We're actually working right now on our plan for next year. And this really drives all of our violence prevention efforts. ICJIA is mandated to coordinate violence prevention statewide. And you'll likely hear more about, if you're not involved already, you're likely to hear more about this in the coming months. We have a variety of programs under the violence prevention rubric of at the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. I know there are other state agencies that also have a hand in some violence prevention efforts, but the ones that ICJIA does, the main ones are listed here. We have our CBVIP program, which is about 35 agencies that do community engagement and support, such as pro-social programming. It could be recreational activities, community events. There's prevention supports for children and youth and families who are at risk of being harmed and risk of harming others. There's long-term and ongoing trauma-informed support and services that are offered. It really runs the gamut. Our Safe from the Start program is our longest running program. It started as a demonstration project in '99 that was federally funded, that identifies and serves children primarily ages 0 to 5 who've been exposed to and traumatized by violence, either at home or in their community. And that program involves both direct services, coalition building, and public education. I think right now there's nine Safe from the Start grantees around the state. The R3 program, the Renew, Reinvest, and Restore program, that's funded by cannabis, proceeds of cannabis tax dollars. Those fund programs in Illinois specifically for communities that have been harmed by violence and excessive incarceration. And there's 5 separate program areas that are funded under R3. It's civil legal aid, economic development, reentry, youth development, and violence prevention. And then we have our line item appropriations, and this is all of the folks on this call are those are under this program. And these are just line items that are specifically recommended by legislators for organizations to do violence prevention in the community. So there's a wide variety of programs from youth development to truancy, street outreach, employment programs. And right now we have, I think it's about 30 organizations that are doing violence prevention under the line item appropriations. And I won't go through the next few slides, but on the next few slides, I have a list of all of those. So when I send you the slide deck, feel free to go through those, identify organizations that you may be familiar with if you have any questions. Okay, so before we kind of move into compliance, I just want to talk briefly about violence prevention. I feel like the 4 new grantees that we have on the call have experience in this arena, so I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about it. But we do ask that your violence prevention programs kind of have 3 separate components. Whatever your participant, your actual direct service related program is, and that can be, you know, whether it's a primary, secondary, or tertiary focused program, or all 3, or 2 of 3, doesn't matter. But we do ask that part of your program be direct services in some way. We also ask that you do staff training. So whatever training is needed for your staff, whether it's in terms of violence prevention, mental health first aid, trauma-informed support, we do ask that you do train your staff in some way on whatever service you're doing. And it could be ongoing, it could be initial training for new staff, but we do want to see that the staff have the tools they need to properly do the program. And then the third piece is collaboration. We realize that based on the research that we've seen, that violence prevention programs are much more successful when they collaborate with other organizations. And that can be collaboration at various levels. It can be collaboration at a higher leadership level. It can be collaboration with frontline staff. It can be referrals, back and forth referrals to agencies, from agencies to you. But we do know that programs are more successful when there's collaboration involved. So we ask that your programs include these three components. All right, I'm going to hand this off to Alan, who's going to talk about I'm sorry, not Alan, Luana, my bad. Hand it off to Luana, who's going to talk about the grant execution process.
Hi again, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to try to be brief. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly talk about the grant review process. Before I get started, I want to say, next slide. Before I get started, I wanted to stress how important it is to maintain consistent contact with your grant monitor. This will help ensure compliance and accountability. It'll make sure that your program is adhering to all of the grant terms. Maintaining contact ensures that any issues or challenges communicated are promptly addressed and we can come to a quicker resolution. We are here to provide support. We have the expertise, the experience in managing and developing grants, so we can provide you valuable guidance on best practices, problem solving, and how to get your grant approved through the legal and fiscal department. And communication also helps foster trust, and it helps build the relationship between your organization and ICJIA. Next slide, please. Okay, so the legal review process is a crucial step that ensures your project complies with all relevant laws, regulations, and contractual obligations before, during, and after the grant period. Legal experts will review your grant agreement, your program plans, and all related documents to ensure that they meet the legal requirements and align with the grant terms. They will verify that your project adheres to federal, state, and local laws, as well as specific regulations related to your grant. This process helps identify potential legal risk and issues that might affect your program, and it'll also help you give you recommendations to address them. Our legal team also offers ongoing support. The support continues throughout the grant project, and this will help with any legal questions or issues that may arise. This continues to help you ensure with compliance. And this protects your program's integrity as well as your organization's reputation. Next slide. The fiscal review process is another essential step to ensure that your program manages and uses grant funds properly and effectively. The fiscal reviewer will examine your proposed budget to ensure that expenses align with grant guidelines and project goals. The reviewer not only checks to see if your calculations are correct, but to make sure that your financial practices comply with relevant laws, regulations, and the specific terms of the grant agreement. The review also prepares you for any potential audits by ensuring all financial activities are transparent and well documented. Next page, please. Okay, so now I'm going to briefly talk about compliance. Why is it important to register in GATA? Registering in the GATA Accountability and Transparency System, also known as GATA, is crucial for several reasons. For compliance, GATA registration ensures that you meet all legal and regulatory requirements for receiving and managing grants. For transparency, it promotes accountability and transparency in how grant funds are used and provides a clear record for public oversight. And also, many grant funding opportunities require GATA registration. GATA registration also helps mitigate risk management. By registering in GATA, you will be required to complete the GATA Internal Control Questionnaire, also known as the ICQ. By completing that questionnaire, You ensure compliance, improved internal controls, and you maintain eligibility for crucial funding opportunities. Okay, so when you're registering in the GATA system, please make sure you elect your indirect cost rate. If you've never received an indirect cost rate from a federal agency, you can elect to use the 10% de minimis rate. However, if you have received an indirect cost rate from a federal agency, you can use that rate, or you can choose to use a lower rate. Okay, another part of compliance is SAMS.gov. This is where you register in the SAMS.gov system. You will receive your UEI, your cage code number, and you will also register as a central contractor. This is for transparency and accountability, and this also helps track how funds are used and distributed. Also, if you are a nonprofit, it's important that you are registered with the Secretary of State as a nonprofit. By registering with the Secretary of State, your nonprofit agency gains legal status, compliance, and credibility, which is crucial for operating effectively as a nonprofit. In most cases, not all, being registered for a nonprofit, your organization benefits from tax relief, increased funding opportunities, enhanced credibility, legal protection, all of which supports and help you sustain operations. And just to mention the stop pay list. Any agency in Illinois that receives grant funds can put you on the stop pay list. You can be put on the stop pay list for several reasons. Just a few being outstanding obligations, compliance issues, or risk management. Please know that if you are on the stop pay list, we can continue to process your grant. However, we will not be able to voucher you any funds until those issues are resolved. Thank you. We can't hear you, Shay.
After 4 years, you think I'd remember to hit that unmute button. I can't see the chat box. Someone can see the chat box, are there any questions before we move on to the next part?
No, there are no questions, and I will monitor the chat box for you.
Great. Okay, let's hand it off to Jaslyn.
I'm going to be discussing initial grant documents. I'm going to begin with the application. Do not complete page 1. Grant specialists usually fill that out. Make sure the implementing agency is filled out, which is the entity name in the legislation. Program agency, please fill that out too. Entity responsible for implementing the program. If you're a nonprofit agency, both implementing and program will be the same name. Next. Next is program narrative. Complete all questions, including the questions about your agency total current budget and these grant funds. Next will be deliverables. Examples are, when are you hiring? When are you doing outreach? When are you securing subcontract documents? Then will be the objectives/performance measures, which we'll see an example on the next slide. Before we do that, make sure you add numbers and risk protective factors. Risk/protective factors can be found in the CDC website, and it's provided to you in the slide. There you can see the template that we use for these performance measures. The slide is the template. Please make sure you add numbers in the gray boxes. Process objective will be the number of individuals or number of trainings, as well as participants served. Please add additional lines if you need to. Next slide. This is the outcome objective. This is a template that we use as well, and it provides to you an example. As you can see right here, 50 students will demonstrate a 40% increase in their GPA based on pre and post test. In the bottom, that would be for you to fill that out. And the gray boxes will be your numbers that you will be using. Next slide. Elements of review. These are some things we always look for: complete documents, program consistent across all documents, clear program activity and cost. Material should be in the grant compliance. Make sure that the budget, narrative, they all match what the program is. Next slide. Next would be the budget. Please use a tip sheet. Fill out the blue cells in the budget. Narrative must demonstrate that items are reasonable and necessary for the program. Be as detailed as you can in the narrative. Break out the cost of items in the narrative portion of the budget. If there is something you do not understand, contact your grant specialist. We are here to help you. Next would be common changes required. Usually is to clarify grant activity or clarify budgeted elements and how they will be used. Clarify how cost projections were developed. How did you get to that amount? If you explained the budget in the budget slide previously, you shouldn't have a problem with that. Some cases to specify basis on indirect cost. Just very briefly, indirect costs are those costs that are not identified in the direct costs, but necessary for the general operation of the organization. An example of that would be payroll.
Great. Thanks, Jaslyn. Alan? Alan, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I was muted. Sorry. So there's some. We're going to talk about some additional matters of compliance that you should be aware of as we're starting a new fiscal year. In the next few slides, we're going to discuss compliance issues surrounding subcontracts and subawards, published materials, background checks, conflicts of interest, executive pay, compensation, and pre-award costs. Now, some of your agencies might enlist the services of other agencies to carry out some aspects of your grant program. If a subawardee is responsible for some of the goals, objectives, and performance measures that are outlined in your grant agreement, you must identify who those subawards are. Normally, a competitive process is required when selecting a subaward. However, if you are a line item grantee, which most of you are, you only need to name them in your budget. If they are not named, you must use a competitive process to select subawardees, which means there must be an open and merit-based process that any potential subawards would have to go through. And you must also be aware that there is additional documentation that will be required for these subawards. So usually the same documentation that you, the grantee, required to submit to us, they would also have to submit, which would include an application, a budget. You will submit a risk assessment for them, as well as a subaward agreement. You're allowed to either utilize an agreement that your agency has put together, assuming that you guys first submit that to us and our legal department approves of that, or you can just use the ICJIA template. Sometimes easier to just go that route, but you should be aware of the requirements that apply to your subawards. They should also be in good standing with the state of Illinois and all those other things. You might also be some of you might enlist the services of a subcontractor to provide services to your agency. Now, this differs from subawards in that the services are provided to the agency and not to the program participant. So some examples of this might be accountants or consultants, IT services, things of that nature. You should also be aware that additional documentation is also required for your subcontractors. Your subcontractors cannot begin working on the program or be compensated until the subcontract documentation has been approved. So that's important to know, that if you have subcontractors that are going to be working on your program, that we have to approve those before they begin working, because we generally will not reimburse retroactively. We are aware that some of you may have subcontractors that you're already working with. You should still submit documentation for them. And we normally, I think there's some flexibility. You can correct me if I'm wrong with this, but there should be flexibility for us to approve those costs to the beginning of the grant if they were already working with your agency.
Right.
So we're going to talk next about published material. So if you're going to be using any of our grant funds to publish any material, you are required to obtain ICJIA approval before doing so. This does not apply to press releases or flyers that are advertising approved program activities. So that would be activities that are specified in the grant agreement that you have agreed to carry out for our grant program. It's also not applicable to newsletters or issue analysis. Now, for press releases and public announcements concerning work that you're performing or carrying out for this agreement, we do ask that you notify us at least 10 days prior to issuing those press releases or public announcements, and that is a requirement per the grant agreement. But all publications and announcements, flyers, brochures, and material should also include the ICJIA disclaimer that is in your grant agreement as well. But that phrase usually just says funding is provided in whole or in part by the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. So those are just some things to be aware of as it relates to published materials. Next, background checks. So you should be aware that background checks are required for all of your program staff and independent contractors and volunteers if they're going to be working directly with you. This requirement does also extend to your subawards, to their staff, their contractors, as well as their volunteers, if they are going to be working with the youth on the program. The background check should be completed prior to the individual being hired or the contractor being hired and beginning their work on the program. And your agency should have some sort of a written protocol on file that requires a fingerprint-based background checks that are done through the Illinois State Police for all persons that you must maintain the documentation of completion that has been completed, and you should have documentation on file of the results of those background checks. All right, so next is the conflicts of interest. Now, first, I think it's helpful just to define what a conflict of interest is. The conflict of interest is going to be defined as a situation that arises when a person in a position of authority over an organization may benefit financially from a decision he or she could make in that capacity, including indirect benefits such as to a family member or businesses with which you are closely associated. And so what we generally require is that your organization establish some sort of safeguards that will prohibit any employee, especially executives, from using their positions of authority in any way that would give an appearance of being motivated by a desire for their own private gain or for that of others. So with that said, you should avoid any real or apparent conflict of interest. As a grantee, if you are aware that we can go to the next slide, Jay. If you are, okay. You are required to immediately notify us in writing of any potential or actual conflict of interest that you know of. So if you know that you're going to be doing business with a family member, you should be disclosing that to us in writing upon submission of your budget. So if that's going to be included, if there are members of your family that are listed on the personnel page of your budget, if they are listed as contractors, you should let us know that as soon as possible. And that's very important because, you know, not notifying us of that, and should we become aware of that, that could pose issues for the for your grant. So that could have negative implications there. Next, we're going to talk about the personnel and executive pay compensation. So when you're completing your budget, it is important to note two things. And this is something that we've seen more often. You should only be listing individuals who receive a W-2 from your agency in the personnel section of your budget. You should not be listing any contractors or 1099 contractors under personnel. And that's important to know because like I said, we have seen that before. And usually the way that this comes up is in the course of a site visit, we'll, you know, ask for documentation, and that's normally when we find out that someone is a 1099, but they're identified as personnel. So you should be aware that if you are paying an individual as a contractor, they should be in the contractual section of your budget, and that also requires that certain documentation be submitted. So you can talk to your grant specialist about what the documentation requirements are. But if there is a contractor, they should be listed in the contractual section of your budget. Also, if you're going to be charging an executive's pay directly to a grant versus indirectly, you should be aware that ICJIA has recently implemented a executive compensation policy that limits the percentage of time, also has salary limits with regards to executives. Again, you can check with your grant specialist about what those requirements are there. We'd be happy to send documentation out to you about that is and what it means for your agency. Look, usually we do require some type of executive compensation checklist that will be sent out to you to analyze what percentage of time are being spent on different executive functions on the grant. So you can check with your grant specialist to see what that is. But again, these are errors that we see often as far as you should be aware about where to list your personnel and contractors. And the fact that we do have executive compensation requirements. All right, so we'll go to my final slide. Pre-award costs. So pre-award costs are costs that are incurred from the beginning of the performance period until the execution of the grant. So say most of you will probably have a performance period that spans from July 1st of this year until June 30th of 2025. So the pre-award costs are going to be costs that you will incur between the start date, which is July 1st, and the day it's executed. So assuming it's executed on July 1, that would be great for you. But if it's executed after that, that would be, say it's executed on July the 15th, it would be your pre-award period would be from July 1st through the 15th of July. What is important to note is that pre-award costs does not cover costs that are incurred before the performance period. So if you have costs that you've incurred, say this month, that is not going to be included in your performance period. The biggest thing with the pre-award costs is that you, the grantee, assume the risk and the liability should those costs not be approved in your final approved budget. So we know that you'll submit a budget to us. There are costs that you have in that budget. But as we're going through this approval process, there may be some things that we may disallow. If you have spent money on those things during that pre-award period and they're not in the final approved budget, we will not reimburse for those costs, and you will assume the liability for that. A special note is that subawards that are included in the proposal and subcontracts identified as necessary for the startup of the grant may be paid retroactively to the beginning of the program period. You should let your ICJIA grant specialist know if you have one of these situations, so that we can ensure that they can be paid retroactively to the start of the program period. However, they cannot be paid until the subcontract or the subaward has been approved by ICJIA. And usually the pre-award cost approval process is outlined here on the slide, that if your grant is executed between, within the month of July or within 30 days of the start date, you'll simply document those pre-award costs on your fiscal report. So you'll just be submitting your expenses as normal for the month of July. However, if your grant is executed beyond the month of July or beyond the first 30 days, there is usually additional requirements for that. So you would have to submit the ICJIA financial documentation report, which would document the pre-award costs that your agency has. And additionally, you may be required by your grant specialist to submit additional backup documentation. So those are some things just to be aware of as it relates to those pre-award costs. And again, the biggest thing to take away is that your agency would assume the liability and the risk for those costs if they are not in the final approved budget. So I would say spend with caution.
Thank you, Alan. And I just want to add that what you didn't say is that there's actually an error in the slide that I was supposed to correct and I didn't, is that all this information implies in the slide that it really only applies to subgrants and subcontracts, but it doesn't. As Alan explained, it really does apply to the entire grant. So before I send the slide deck out, I'll make sure I make that correction.
Shay, there are 2 questions in the chat from Nick Schaefer. One question is, do non-fingerprint backgrounds check meet the requirements?
No.
Okay. The second question is, do trainers count as subcontractors?
Yes. If they are not on staff, then yes. Okay. If there's nothing else, we can move on to the payment methods, which Sarah Wilson will talk about.
ICJIA currently offers 3 methods of dispersal for grant funds. That is standard reimbursement, advance pay, and working capital advance. And we're going to go over each of these individually. So the first method of disbursement is standard reimbursement, and this is not an advance. The grantee will pay an expense, and then they will report that expense on their periodic financial report, which is also known as the PFR tool. You're going to use this to report all of your expenses that you need to be reimbursed throughout the grant fund. And ICJIA will basically reimburse the grantee for your expenses after you've paid them. So this can be done monthly or quarterly, and submission of backup documentation is not required. However, your grant specialist as well as fiscal staff can request backup documentation for your fiscal report. So just make sure you keep record of all of your expenses and everything to support your PFR tool. The next method is going to be advance pay. So advance pay allows for an initial cash dispersal. You're basically going to report your previous month expense as well as your anticipated expense for the following month on your periodic financial tool. And the tool is just going to calculate how much you need by calculating how much you have on hand and how much you projected, and basically give you just enough so you can basically have an inflow, an advance afloat. And there is an assessment that is needed for advance pay, but we're going to talk about that a little later as well with working capital advance, because there's an assessment that's required for both of them. The next payment method I'll talk about is working capital advance. So working capital advance will allow for initial dispersal of projected expenses for a period not to exceed 2 months of grant expenses and startup costs. So you're going to basically prepare a cash budget, and we're going to calculate what's needed for the first 2 months of programming. And subsequent dispersals are going to be reimbursed for actual expenditures throughout the grant. And it's going to kind of serve as a nest egg so that you have enough expenses to carry you throughout cycle the life of the grant. And basically, it'll start to draw down from your working capital advance at the end of the grant, just to make sure that you don't have any cash on hand at the end and everything has been fully expended by the end of the grant period. So with advance pay and working capital advance, you're going to submit a few things that's required. And I'll talk about this a little later. So basically with advance pay and working capital advance, you're going to complete an assessment. You're going to complete a cash budget that's going to basically estimate your grant expenses for the next 12 months. You can only do monthly reporting with these two methods of payment, unlike standard reimbursement where you can do quarterly reporting. And you're going to also be subjected to backup documentation and PFR reviews when you take these two methods of payment. And that's just a compliance requirement that ICJIA has. And then there is a potential for additional backup documentation reviews as well with these two payment methods. So with the assessment, you're going to basically start by letting your grant specialist know that you are interested in working capital advance or advance pay. You must go through the advance pay process before you're considered for working capital advance. And if you're denied advance pay, you will be able to get a chance of getting approved for working capital advance. The assessment will be conducted by a consulting firm. So ICJIA is going to refer you out to an outside consulting firm, and they're going to conduct a review with you to let you know if you're eligible for advance pay. And there's documentation that is required that's going to be on the next slide. So the assessment items are going to include basically having your chart of accounts reviewed. There's going to be review, examination, and test samples of financial reports. There's going to be review of internal control procedures such as fund transactions, authorization controls, recording controls, and segregation duties, just to determine if you're eligible for advance pay. There's also going to be review of procedures relating to advance payment, including prompt payment of contractor and sub-recipients. There's going to be review of any documentation demonstrating training and awareness related to fraud and ethics, as well as examination of your final approved budget. And again, if you are interested in working capital advance, you're going to have to go through the advance pay process first. Even if you don't think you're approved, there's still a chance that you can get approved for advance pay. But like I said before, if you're not able to get advance pay, you can be eligible to get working capital advance. And that's just to give you a little bit more in the beginning to make sure that you're able to, get your reimbursements with your grant.
Shay, you're muted. And I would like to add something to the advanced pay discussion.
Go ahead.
Just so you know, when you are requesting advance pay, before you request it, make sure that you are able to give the external reviewer all of the documentation that they are requesting before you request it. Because when you get in the process and you change your mind, our agency is charged for that cost. So just please make sure that you are sure this is what you want to do before questioning it. Do not stop the process in midway.
Yeah, thanks, Luana. Yes, so your grant specialist is going to give you all that information ahead of time, so you know what to expect. So you have plenty of opportunity to make a decision one way or another before a vendor would reach out to you. Thank you. Okay, so just want to say approval process. What's next? So Luana had described at the beginning kind of a three-part approval process where the grant specialist, our legal department, and our fiscal department review your grant. The grant also has to be approved by the ICJIA budget committee. The next budget committee meeting is July 18th. Our goal is to be able to present your grant to them at this meeting. I know that the due date for the new grantees to submit your documentation to the grant specialist is July 3rd. If you're able to submit it earlier, that would be great. We need that information so we can prepare and send out the budget committee documents to the budget committee members, which we do a couple of weeks before the meeting. So there's really not a lot of time between the time that your documentation is due, and we have to present and pull all that information together into a format that the budget committee needs and give that information to them. So please make sure that you get your documentation to us on time, no later than the 3rd of July and earlier if at all possible. At the budget committee meeting, we're going to ask that you attend that meeting. While technically it's not mandatory, these are not our programs, these are your programs. So any questions that the budget committee members may have really need to be answered by you. They can't really be answered by us. So it behooves you to attend the budget committee meeting. Highly, highly recommended. And then do want to say that when we send this recording out to you today, hopefully by the end of today, with an updated PowerPoint presentation slide deck, I'll also send you a list of these recordings that are available. These are trainings that we did, I think, about a year ago when we had a much larger cohort of brand new grantees. So anytime you kind of come across these issues, there's a lot more detail that's provided. What we did today was just give you a little summary, a quick summary of each one of the kind of high ticket items that we come across. I do want to reiterate, communication is key. Luana talked about that at the beginning. Jaslyn talked about how important it is that your program narrative reflect your budget and the other way around. Alan talked about compliance issues, subcontract documentation. We come up with this all the time where grantees start using subcontractors that haven't been approved, and then they have to, they have to pay that money back. So make sure that you get approval for subcontracts before you start requesting reimbursement for those. And with the working capital advance and advance pay, I know everybody likes those ideas, likes that, and it's needed by a lot of grantees that don't have the cash flow. If you have the cash to be able to handle reimbursement, I would say that's definitely the easiest method to do. But again, that working capital advance is there, and advance pay is there for a reason for grantees that need it. So if there's, are there any other questions, Luana?
Yes, let me see. Could you tell us the date and time of the budget committee meeting again? That's from Jennifer Coble.
Yep, it's July 18th at 10 a.m.
Okay, and Nick Schaefer, will we be able to add someone to the distribution list for this information? For some reason, my ED is the only one who was notified about this meeting. So he would like to be added to the distribution list. That's Nick Schaefer. He put his email address in the chat.
Okay, yep, we can do that. Okay. All right. Oh, that's the wrong thing. I want to stop sharing my screen. Okay. So any other last questions? If there aren't any, you all have the contact information to your grant specialists. Please feel free to reach out to them at any time. That's why they're, that's why they're here. You can also reach out to me or Luana if you have any questions. We're really here as a team to make sure that you're successful, both in terms of getting the grant up and running, as well as the monitoring and the life of the grant. So I was hoping that I would see Nick Schaefer's email address in the chat box, which is why I stopped sharing my screen. I don't see it. So Nick, if you could just put your email address in the chat box. I will make sure that you got it. I see it now. Thank you. We'll make sure that you get a copy of all these materials along with everyone else who we have the information for. So thank you very much. That concludes today's session. Feel free to, if you have additional questions, to stay on. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.